I'd always been the odd one out in my family. While my older sisters Diane and Rebecca both followed our parents' well-trodden path into corporate law, I chose a different direction, pursuing my passion for sustainable architecture. According to my family, this made me the creative but impractical one, the sister who could never quite get her life together. "Maya, honey, when are you going to get a real job?" Mom would ask during our monthly family dinners, despite the fact that I've been working at the same architecture firm for 7 years. "Architecture is a real job, Mom," I'd reply with practiced patience. "Of course it is, sweetie," she'd say in that tone that meant the exact opposite. "But is it stable?" It didn't matter that I'd helped design award-winning sustainable buildings across the country. It didn't matter that I lived comfortably within my means in a modest but beautifully renovated apartment, because I didn't match their definition of success. Corner office, 6-figure salary, luxury car. They viewed my life choices with a mixture of confusion and pity. My sisters were particularly vocal about my supposed financial instability. Diane, the eldest at 37, never missed an opportunity to remind everyone about her latest bonus or vacation home purchase. Rebecca, 35, was more subtle but equally condescending, offering to help me with my budget whenever I mentioned any purchase larger than a coffee. I learned to brush off their comments over the years, focusing instead on building a life that made me happy rather than one that impressed them. But what happened last spring still makes my blood boil when I think about it. It started with a family dinner in March. Diane had just received a promotion and was in rare form, dominating the conversation with tales of her corporate heroics. So to celebrate, she announced, clinking her fork against her wine glass dramatically, "I've decided to treat the family to a luxury vacation in Bali this summer. 2 weeks at a 5-star resort, all expenses paid." Our parents beamed with pride while Rebecca gasped in delight. "That's incredibly generous, Diane." "Well, it's important to share success with the people who matter," Diane replied, smiling broadly. I waited for her to look in my direction, to include me in the invitation. Instead, an uncomfortable silence fell over the table as everyone suddenly became very interested in their plates. "Maya," Diane finally said, her voice taking on a delicate tone that immediately put me on edge, "we were thinking this trip might be a bit much for your situation." "My situation?" I repeated, setting down my fork. "You know," Rebecca chimed in with Fox concern, "with your career being more passion-driven than profit-driven. The time off alone would be a financial hit for you. Not to mention the spending money you'd need," Diane added. "We're planning some exclusive excursions that are quite costly." I felt heat rising to my face as I realized what was happening. "Are you saying I'm not invited to the family vacation because you think I can't afford it?" No, Mom interjected quickly. "They're just concerned about putting you in an awkward position." "We know how independent you are," Dad added, clearly uncomfortable. "You wouldn't want us paying your way." "Even though we absolutely would," Diane said with artificial sweetness that made my teeth hurt. "But we know your pride wouldn't allow it." The assumption was so wildly off base that I almost laughed. While I lived more modestly than my sisters by choice, I was far from struggling financially. In fact, thanks to some smart investments and my habit of saving rather than showing off, I was in an excellent financial position. But before I could correct their misperception, Rebecca spoke up again. "Actually, Maya, there is something you could help us with while we're away." I should have seen it coming. "Both our regular nannies are unavailable those weeks," she continued, "and we were hoping you might watch the kids. They love their Auntie Maya, and we pay you, of course." 5 children, 2 weeks, while they sipped cocktails on a Balinese beach. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "I'm not invited on the family vacation because you think I can't afford it, but you want me to babysit your children for 2 weeks while you're all gone." "When you put it that way, it sounds terrible," Diane laughed, waving her hand dismissively. "Think of it as house-sitting with benefits. You get to stay in our homes, use our pools. We'd stock the fridges," Rebecca added helpfully. I looked around the table, waiting for anyone, to acknowledge the absurdity of the situation. Instead, they were all nodding as if this was a perfectly reasonable arrangement. "I'll have to check my schedule," I managed to say, which they immediately interpreted as agreement. The conversation moved on, but I remained silent for the rest of the meal, a plan already forming in my mind. Over the next few weeks, Diane and Rebecca ramped up their vacation planning, creating a family group chat that excluded me where they shared resort photos and excursion options. Meanwhile, They created a separate chat with just me to coordinate the childcare details. When to pick up each child, their schedules, dietary restrictions, and an ever-growing list of rules and requirements. I responded politely but non-committally, neither agreeing to nor refusing their requests outright. Whenever they pressed for confirmation, I'd cite work commitments that I needed to sort out first. This is exactly why you need a more structured career path, Diane texted after I mentioned potential work conflicts. Corporate jobs have clear vacation policies. I didn't bother explaining that my unstructured career had actually given me considerable flexibility and autonomy. I was saving that revelation for later. A month before their scheduled departure, I finally agreed to meet them for coffee to finalize the arrangements. They arrived with color-coded binders for each child, looking relieved that their child care plan was coming together. "We can't thank you enough, Maya," Rebecca said, sliding a binder across the table. "The kids are so excited to have their fun aunt staying with them." "About that," I said, taking a sip of my coffee, "I'm afraid I won't be able to watch the children after all." Their expressions fell in perfect synchronization. "What do you mean?" Diane demanded. "We've been planning this for months." "No, you've been planning this for months," I corrected her. "I never actually agreed to it. I said I needed to check my schedule, and I have. It turns out I'll be out of the country those weeks." "Out of the country?" Rebecca echoed incredulously. "Where could you possibly be going?" I smiled. "Bali, actually." The silence that followed was deeply satisfying. "That's not funny, Maya," Diane finally said. "I'm not joking. I've booked my own trip to Bali. Different resort, different dates. I'm leaving a week before you and staying a week longer, actually." "But how can you afford?" Rebecca caught herself, but not quickly enough. "Afford it?" I finished for her. "Quite easily, as it happens. Contrary to what you all seem to believe, I'm not struggling financially. I may not flaunt my money like you do, but that doesn't mean I don't have any." Their disbelief would have been comical if it wasn't so insulting. "You should call a professional childcare service," I suggested, gathering my bag. "They'll need some advance notice." I left them sitting there, mouths still slightly agape, feeling lighter than I had in years. The next few weeks brought a barrage of texts and calls. First from my sisters, then from my parents when their appeals failed to move me. The messaging evolved from indignation to guilt-tripping to, finally, grudging offers to include me in their trip after all. "We never meant to exclude you," Diane claimed in a particularly revisionist voicemail. "There must have been a misunderstanding." I didn't bother responding. Instead, I focused on my own travel preparations and a special project I'd been working on in my spare time. As their departure date approached, my mother called with one last attempt at reconciliation. "Your sisters feel terrible about the misunderstanding, Maya. They want to make it right. Won't you at least come to the airport to see everyone off? The children would love to say goodbye to their aunt." I considered refusing, but the opportunity was too perfect to pass up. "Sure, Mom. I'd be happy to." The morning of their departure, I arrived at the international terminal dressed casually but tastefully, a simple envelope in my hand. My parents and sisters were already there with their mountain of luggage and 5 overexcited children running in circles around them. Auntie Maya, my nieces and nephews cried in unison when they spotted me, rushing over for hugs. "We're going on an airplane to see monkeys," my youngest nephew informed me solemnly. "That sounds amazing, buddy," I said, giving him an extra squeeze. My sisters approached more cautiously, their expressions a mixture of discomfort and forced cordiality. "Thanks for coming to see us off," Diane said stiffly. "The kids are thrilled." I nodded, then held out the envelope. "I brought something for you, a parting gift." Rebecca took it, eyeing me suspiciously. "What is this?" "Open it." Inside was a detailed financial portfolio statement with my name at the top. I'd redacted some personal information but left the totals clearly visible: my investment accounts, retirement funds, property equity, and liquid assets. The bottom line was highlighted in yellow, a number that made both my sisters' eyes widen. "Is this real?" Diane asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Completely. I've been investing since I was 22, living below my means, making smart choices with my money instead of showing it off." I took the paper back and returned it to the envelope. "I could buy that resort you're staying at if I wanted to. But unlike some people, I don't measure my worth or others by their bank accounts." The airport announcement system called their flight for boarding, but neither of my sisters moved, still processing what they'd just seen. Maya, we had no idea, Rebecca began. That was the point. I cut her off. You never bothered to ask. You assumed that because I chose a different path, I must be struggling. You excluded me from a family vacation because of your own biases and then expected me to be grateful for the chance to babysit your children while you enjoyed yourselves. We made a mistake, Diane admitted, looking genuinely contrite for perhaps the first time in her adult life. We should have included you. Yes, you should have. Not because I can afford it, but because I'm your sister. The boarding announcement repeated, more urgently this time. You should get going, I said, stepping back. Wouldn't want to miss your flight. Wait, Rebecca said suddenly. If you're so financially secure, why did you let us believe otherwise all these years? Why live in that small apartment and drive that old car? I smiled. Because I value experiences over possessions, sustainability over excess, and authenticity over appearances. My life looks exactly the way I want it to, whether you understand that or not. With that, I hugged each of my nieces and nephews, promised to bring them souvenirs from my own Bali trip, and walked away, leaving my sisters to make a mad dash for their gate. They missed their flight. I know this because I was already relaxing in the airline lounge, waiting for my own departure later that day. I'd actually changed my plans when Mom had convinced me to come to the airport. Why drive there twice? My flight to Bali, in business class, wasn't leaving for another 4 hours. As I sipped my complimentary champagne, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Girls missed their flight. Rebooking for tomorrow. What did you say to them? I didn't reply. Some lessons are worth missing a flight for. My time in Bali was transformative, not because of the luxury resort or the infinity pool, though those were nice, but because for the first time in my adult life, I felt completely free of my family's expectations and judgments. I hiked through rice terraces, learned traditional cooking techniques from local chefs, participated in a community-led reforestation project, and sketched designs for my own sustainable tiny house that I'd been dreaming about building. I returned home renewed and more certain than ever about my chosen path. 2 days after I got back, there was a knock at my apartment door. I opened it to find both my sisters standing awkwardly in the hallway, looking uncharacteristically humble. "Can we come in?" Diane asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside to let them enter. They looked around my modest apartment with new eyes, not with pity or condescension, but with curiosity and perhaps a touch of envy at the evident thought and care in every detail, from the living wall of plants to the custom-built furniture I'd designed myself. "Your place is actually really beautiful," Rebecca admitted, running her hand along the reclaimed wood counter I'd installed. "Thank you." An uncomfortable silence fell until Diane finally spoke. "We owe you an apology, a big one." "Yes, you do," I agreed, not making it easier for them. "We were wrong to exclude you from the trip based on assumptions about your finances," Rebecca said, "and even more wrong to then expect you to watch our children." "It was entitled and thoughtless," Diane added, "and when we saw your portfolio," she shook her head, "it was a wake-up call about how little we actually knew about your life." I studied their faces, looking for the sincerity I'd rarely seen from them before. Surprisingly, it seemed genuine. "Bali was enlightening," Rebecca continued. "Being there, seeing a different culture, it made me realize how caught up we've been in a very narrow definition of success. Our kids wouldn't stop talking about how cool Auntie Maya's job is, designing buildings that help the environment," Diane said with a hint of a smile. "Jackson told his entire kids club that his aunt is saving the planet while we just push papers around." I couldn't help but laugh at that. Kids have a way of cutting to the truth. "We'd like to start over," Rebecca said hesitantly. "Get to know the sister we apparently never bothered to understand. Maybe you could show us what you actually do," Diane suggested. "Your current projects. We've never really asked, and that's on us." I considered their offer. Years of dismissal and judgment couldn't be erased with one apology. But people can change when their perspectives are forcibly shifted. And while I have found peace in my independence, there was a part of me that had always wished for a genuine connection with my sisters. "I'm working on designs for a community of affordable, sustainable homes," I said finally. "I could show you the site next weekend, if you're free." The relief on their faces was palpable. "We'll be there," they promised in unison. As they prepared to leave, Diane paused at the door. "One more thing. Dad's 70th birthday is coming up next month. We were thinking of a family trip to the California wine country, a real family trip this time. Would you help us plan it? You've always had better taste than we have. I smiled, nodding. I'd like that. After they left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the life I'd built for myself. Modest by their standards, perhaps, but intentional and fulfilling in ways they were only beginning to understand. The path to rebuilding our relationship would be long, but for the first time, it seemed possible. Sometimes the most effective revenge isn't about getting even, but about finally being seen for who you truly are. 2 weeks later, I met my sisters at the construction site for my sustainable housing project. They showed up wearing impractical shoes and looking out of place among the dirt and building materials. But they were there, asking questions, listening intently as I explained the solar systems and water reclamation designs. This is actually incredible, Maya, Diane said, genuine admiration in her voice as she studied the plans. You're building homes people can actually afford that don't destroy the planet. Meanwhile, we're helping billionaires become trillionaires, Rebecca added with a self-deprecating laugh. As we walked back to our cars, Rebecca linked her arm through mine, a small gesture that would have seemed impossible months ago. You know what Jackson asked me yesterday? Diane said, brushing dust from her sleeve. He wanted to know if it was too late for Mommy to become an architect like Auntie Maya. I raised an eyebrow. And what did you tell him? She smiled. I told him it's never too late to follow a better path. Nothing had changed overnight. My sisters still lived in their mansions and worked their high-powered jobs. I still preferred my sustainable apartment and meaningful career. But something fundamental had shifted in how we saw each other, not as competitors on the same narrow track, but as women who had chosen different paths worth respecting. And really, that acknowledgement was worth more than any luxury vacation could ever be.